Hello there and welcome to another Bow Beats synthesizer review. Today we're checking out this little synth here. It's the Uno Drum from IK Multimedia. It's an analog and digital drum machine, portable, battery powered and very affordable. So let's check it out. Let's check the workflow. Let's talk about pros and cons and see what it's about. But first we need a little sip of the coffee.
And a word from my sponsor, Skillshare. If you want to try out their affordable video service, you can use my link in the description. The first 500 who uses my link gets 2 months for free, so go and check it out.
So let's start with an overview. What is the Uno Drum here from IK Multimedia? It's an analog and digital drum synthesizer. As you can see down here, we have the 12 pads here. And these sounds here can be analog or digital. So for the 6 sounds down here, we actually have both analog and digital drum synthesis, and for the 6 up here, we only have digital. So for example, for the kick, you can go to sound, you can see it says AN, and we can then switch it to number 2. So there are a couple of different sample-based sounds and one analog drum sound, and the same goes here for the kick number 2, the snare, as you can see, closed hi-hat, open hi-hat, and clap. But for the toms, the rim, the cowbell, the ride, and cymbal, it's just the digital sounds, the sampled sounds. So you can have 6 analog voices and an additional 6 digital ones, or you could just go 12 digital voices altogether. And when it comes to polyphony, this synth has 11 voices of polyphony, but you have 12 tracks to work from. So when we're talking about the different sounds here, you can save the different sounds into a kit. Anybody familiar with Electron devices will know what a kit is. It's basically the settings for each sound saved as sort of a preset for all the sounds. So let me show you what I mean here. So we are in kit number 1 here, and we can go into sound, and we can just select one of the sounds here. Now let's change a bunch of the sounds. So now that we've changed a bunch of the sounds, let me just use select all here. And when I have select all enabled, I can actually use the X button here and kit in order to revert back to a previous saved kit. So let me show you. You saw me reverting back to the kit, which is actually very, very handy for a bunch of situations. This also means that you can, for example, when you're playing a particular pattern here, let's go to pattern number 2 here, we can do something like this. Basically changing the kit while playing a pattern in order to really change the sound, which is kind of cool. Now let's talk patterns. Let me clear a pattern here, and we can see that we have 16 steps. We can go into length, we can increase it to 64 steps, and in order to see the additional steps, you just use the page button here. Very similar in design to something like the Electron units. So let me put down a few trigs here for the kick drum. We can just scroll through here the different pages. Something like this. And we can easily store this brilliant pattern here by holding it down. Like this, it starts flashing, and press it again, it says save. So you can basically save to any of the pattern slots by turning the data knob. Now, while we're talking patterns, there's also a song mode, which is actually very handy. Down here you can see that we have different slots. Basically, if I hold down a slot here, we can set it to whatever pattern we want playing. So let's say here on number 1 we want pattern number 1, and on number 2 we want pattern number 2. And let's play. And we can just fill this up here with random patterns. I have no idea what's going on here with these patterns. And let's change the kit to kit number 1 that I made. As you will note also, the tempo is the tempo isn't saved with the different patterns, it's global. And also a cool thing is you can actually lock the tempo knob so you don't accidentally turn it, because it's right next to the data knob. So if you're changing the data knob, you could accidentally hit the tempo knob, but they've actually thought about that, so they've made it possible to lock it. Now let's go back to my little pattern here, pattern number 5. And what you might want to know is also that you can do parameter locks or automations. So for example, if I hit record here on the kick, we can actually hold down, say, this step here, and we can change the tuning here. I'm just going to exaggerate it so you'll hear it more clearly. Let's do something with the snare here as well. So this is of course very handy, parameter locks. You know that I love that. I think they've actually implemented it really well on this unit, and to me it makes a lot more sense than on the Uno synth. Sure, you can make some really cool monophonic sequences, but on a drum machine, it's sort of the difference between being able to create like a very standard drum groove or creating something much more experimental. Let me just see if I can show you. I think maybe pattern number 3 maybe. So pattern number 3, kit number 3. So you hear I have a little pitch shift going on there on, I think it's one of the hi-hats. And those are the kind of things which are really nice when you can record automations on a drum machine, and which sets this apart from some of the pure analog counterparts like the Drum Brute Impact, where you can't really record any automations like this. Now, what do we have on this unit in terms of inputs and outputs? Well, you can power it from USB or the internal batteries. It takes the normal, I think, AA batteries. And then we have MIDI on these breakout cables. And over here we have an input and an output. But what makes the input cool is that the sound is actually processed through the analog compressor and analog drive. And before we move on, I should mention that the sample-based sounds here, they are actually meant to be a little lo-fi. So these are 12-bit sounds recorded at 32 kilohertz, giving it sort of a lo-fi vibe. So it's sort of it's a point of this little unit to give it sort of more of a gritty tone. So that was just an overview. Now let's get into the workflow. Let's make some beats on it. Let me show you some of the sound shaping possibilities that this little drum machine offers. And then I'll talk about some pros and cons, alternatives, and some final thoughts. So we got our little pattern here that we built. So what kind of control do we have over the individual sounds? Well, the control actually differs depending on if it's a digital voice or if it's an analog voice. The analog voices in general have a little bit more possibilities. So for example, the kick here, kick number 1, we can actually change not only the tuning, but also the FM tuning and FM amount of the sound. So for example, let's see here, enable record. So let's go in here, let's change, we hold down drum, starts blinking. Now you have access to kick 1 FM tuning and FM amount, for example, and sweep time. So let me just change this up. I have no idea if it's going to sound good, but this should give you an idea of kind of what's happening. So as you heard there, we got some different tonalities out of kick number 1. So for the snare, we have a secondary function here, low pass filter. So we engage the low pass filter here on a couple of the steps and just changed it up. Now, of course, for most of the sounds, we do have level, we have tuning, we have snap and decay, but these also have different functions depending on what track or sound you're actually working with. You can read more about it in the manual. There are slight differences depending on what actual sound you're using. And when I select a track, I can, of course, step sequence stuff like you've seen me do here. Just put down a note like this. Or I can just live record it instead. So let me go for the clap. And the same goes for automation, so let me show you. We got a nice little pitch increase there for this rim shot here. We can of course mute, press the mute button, press the tracks you want to mute. We also have this select all feature. I'll come to that in a second. Let's just save my little pattern here. So you can see here I can actually change if I want to save it to number 6 instead, but let's save it to number 5. We've only talked about changing the sound for the individual tracks, but what if we want to change it for the entire pattern, for all the sounds? Well, then we have the effects here. So you have compressor, drive, and stutter effects and the amount of stutter. So with max drive, max compressor, let's turn it down the compressor here. So somewhere around here is pretty nice, but the drive and compressor actually makes a huge difference. It really adds a lot of punch to the sound. We also have 10 different stutter effects. That can be engaged with the roll as well. This is actually one of my favorites, sort of pitch everything down. Or up or down, maybe. Okay. So there's some crazy stuff going on there as well. But yeah, 10 different stutter effects, pretty cool. And then we have sequencer effects. So we have swing, division, humanize, and velocity. The cool swing and division is pretty self-explanatory, but what's going on here, which is really cool, is the humanize feature. The humanize feature is really interesting because it actually adds some human swing to this very sterile groove. So let me show you. So this is with max, so it doesn't sound really good, but let's turn it down a bit. So with humanize, you actually get a lot more of a lively beat. It feels more human, basically. Another feature that I really dig and that I really want to see in more drum machines is the random feature. So let's go to a track here that we haven't been using that much. Cowbell. Let's change the sound. Okay, this will sound horrible, but let's do random cowbell. Okay. If we don't like it, if we use this one, number 3 here. Let's change to another stutter.
Before we move on to the control all feature, which is really cool, I want to talk a little bit about my sponsor, Skillshare, because apparently I can't buy food with synth reviews. Skillshare is an online learning community, basically a video subscription service with over 25,000 different classes in various subjects. A subscription costs less than $10 a month, and if you get their premium membership, you get access to all their different classes. And you can get 2 months for free if you use my link in the description. The first 500 who uses it gets that, so be sure to click it. And to end off, I just want to say that they also have videos about everyday things like brewing coffee. Unfortunately, they don't have any video on how to turn my synth reviews into food, but yeah, that might come later.
Now, before I move over to the pros and cons, I just want to show you one really cool feature that I want to see on pretty much any drum machine. And anybody who loves Electron workflow will love this too. So what we can do here, let me see here. Here's kit. Let's save the kit. Now it's saved. Now what we can do is we can use select all. Now all tracks are selected, and we can use, for example, the tuning, snap, and decay here to change up the sound while we're playing, and then we can revert back to the saved kit. This makes it so that you can actually do some cool live performances and then reverting back to the original kit, which I think is a lot of fun. think you get the idea here.
Now let's talk about some of the pros and the cons. So on the pro side, of course, it's that it's affordable, it's portable, a great combination. It actually fits really nicely with, say, something like the Sculpt from Modal. You know, you have all of these new portable machines, so that's a big plus. Another big plus is the groove functions, the humanize, the randomize, and of course we have, as you saw me do here, select all, change stuff up, the control all features. Basically, that's something that I really dig. And also the input, having that to process stuff through the compressor and drive is never wrong. You know, it might not be something that you use every day, but I think that's a big strength. I pretty much love every device that has an input, because you can use it for other things, or if you have a small setup with a small mono synth, you can just drive it through the compressor and drive as well. So I think that's pretty cool. Now, talking about the cons, the negatives, there are a few things to keep in mind. Firstly, there is no master filter, and I would have loved a master filter. This is something that I really enjoy having on a drum machine. So yeah, of course you can't have everything, but I would have loved a master filter. Now, secondly, while the touch interface works, and I think works a lot better than on the Uno, it makes a lot more sense on a drum machine. On the Uno, I always felt like I wanted a standard keyboard. While it works, it's still not super responsive. Like, it's responsive enough, especially for putting down steps, for example. However, when you're playing and changing, for example, muting, it's very easy that it doesn't register. So I think the responsiveness can be improved upon. I'm not sure if it can be fixed in a firmware update, but I just felt that, yeah, it wasn't 100%. Another negative, which is also a design decision, I think, is that you can't replace the samples. If you could have replaced the samples, it would have been on another level, rivaling some of the sample players. But now you can't, and you cannot do sample locking, so you can't change the sound per step. This might be something that we could get in a firmware update. It would be very cool, but yeah, as is, there's no such functionality. And my last negative is that it can be a little bit noisy. Now, you have to think about this. The samples are kind of lo-fi, they're meant to be gritty, so don't expect like super pristine sounds. And as you heard from my demos, it's kind of this old school sound that they're going for, but the unit itself can be a little bit noisy. I know that this is something that they're working on with firmware updates, and the Uno, talking with others who have worked much more with the Uno was much more noisy when it was released, and then they fixed some of it in the firmware updates. So hopefully this will be adjusted a little bit. It's not something that I notice a lot, but I think it's worth mentioning. If you're looking for something that's not noisy at all, this might not be it currently, but I am definitely hoping that they will be fixing it in firmware updates. Now, last here in the review, let me mention a few alternatives. So of course, the Volcas, the Volca Sample, Volca Beats, and Volca Drum are the go-to alternatives, but I haven't been using them. I don't really have any experience with them other than like playing it at friends' studios and stuff like that, so I can't really speak to it. And then we have the Drum Brute Impact, which is around the same price, and it's something that I have a lot of experience with. Now, it could be a good kind of comparison, because they are different yet the same. So the Drum Brute Impact is larger, more hands-on control, you have more sound shaping possibility per sound. However, it's not as portable. It lacks the parameter locks. It doesn't have these some of these performance controls like you saw me do with the Control All here, obviously, because you can't be saving kits on it, for example. So the Uno here has one up in terms of portability, in terms of programmability. But Drum Brute Impact, of course, pure analog, and the Impact also has better knobs and much nicer feeling pads. So it's something to consider if you want sort of a little bit of a larger drum machine than something like the Uno. But they're of course quite different animals in the way that you'll be using them. The Uno is much more for a smaller setup, maybe a portable setup, maybe a battery-powered setup, whereas I feel like the Drum Brute Impact might be a little bit better for studio use with individual outputs. This could also be considered a negative of the Uno, that it doesn't have individual outputs, but at the price point and with the sort of form factor that it got, I think it would be wishing for too much to have individual outputs. But of course it would have been nice, but we can't have everything.
So thank you so much for watching this little review of the Uno drum. If you have any questions about it, be sure to put them in the comment section, and be sure to check out today's sponsor, Skillshare. The first 500 who uses my link gets 2 months for free of Skillshare, and it's a good service. So the link is in the description. Hope to see you in the next video, and yeah, go and make music, go and have fun, go and enjoy your stuff, play with it, turn the knobs.